Hello guys, thanks for joining this session. In this session, we are going to look into PowerShell loops. So let's look into the topic. What are the topics which we are going to discuss in this session? So in this session, we are going to discuss about what are loops and why do we need it. Then we will learn about types of loops supported by PowerShell. Then we will look into how to code loops. So we are going to cover all these kind of loops in this session, and once we will understand that, then we will also discuss about and what scenario each of these type of loops can be used. So we will discuss each of them. Once we understand that, then we will proceed further and we will also look into interrupting a loop, because it is pretty much required sometime in certain scenarios where we require to interrupt the loop. So let's jump into the PowerShell scripting editor, and where we will all this topic with an example. So we are into PowerShell editor. Now let's understand what are loops and why do we need it. Loops can be used to repeat execution of code rather than duplicate the code. To understand this statement, let's look into this example. Suppose that if we have an array with a value called 50, 30, 44, 60, 80, and now I want to print this value with their indexes. So we have two ways. The first way, what we will do, we will use write output, and we will print it. Suppose to print the first value, we will print it like this. Now for the second value, we can copy paste it. So let me do it now. So here I have created these codes. So where what we are doing, we are printing the first element, the second, third, fourth, fifth, and their values. Now select this one and let's run it. So it is printing like this. But the problem with this thing is that we need to repeat each of the element one by one. So that is not very efficient programming. So the better way is to use the loop. So let's write it now. So I'm going to use the for loop. So how we can write it? We can use for, and here we can specify a variable, that is I equal to 0 I, and here we need to specify that the comparison operator which we have seen in the earlier session, and here less than 5 I plus plus, and within the curly braces we will use the same statement only a single time. You can copy it, paste it over here, and instead of first, what we will do, we will remove that, and here we can specify $I and remove that, and then we can specify over here I. $I is a variable, so we can use $I. Now let's run it. Let's look into the values, what the value it is printing. Let's run it. So we did a mistake over here. We need to use the dollar value. Sorry for that. Now again try to run it. So it has printed the same. You can handle this first, second, and all this thing third with the help of conditioning. With if condition, you can check that. So I haven't handled it over here. So you can design it like that way as well. But the problem here, we are printing first value and we are starting it. To handle this with the same output like this, you can use +1 so that we can get the output like this. So let's run it again. Let me run it like this. So here you can use $J equal to $I plus 1, and instead of I you can use $J, so that we can get the incremented value over here. So let's run it. So we are getting the same value. I hope now you understand that what are loops and why do we need it. Now proceed further. Let's look into the topic. So the next topic is types of loops supported by PowerShell. So we have for loop, which we have seen now, for each loop, for each object, while loop, do until loop, and piping, that is an implicit looping. So let's look into the example one by one. So now we will discuss all these three topics: types of loops supported by PowerShell, how to code loops, and each type of loop, when to use it. So we will discuss all these in an example within PowerShell scripting editor. So let's jump into PowerShell scripting editor and let's discuss about each loop one by one and why we use these loops and when to use it. So we are into PowerShell scripting editor, and here we have already seen the example for loop like this. We have used earlier the for loop. So let's understand that when to use for loop. For loop is really good when we have numbers to use to limit the loop. So in that scenario, for loop is really very handy. In this example we have used where we have to repeat the index number, and here we need to limit the number. So see here we are limiting over here and checking that whether the value of I is less than 5 or not. So this scenario is perfectly suitable for loop. Now let's look into the for each loop example, and then we will discuss in what scenario you can use it. So let's do the code for each loop. So suppose if we have users and we want to iterate these users, so how we can do that? Suppose we have these values, then we have so I want to iterate these value. How we can do that? So this is a collection and I want to iterate this, so we can use for each loop over here. So it is really very handy when iterating the collection. And so here we can use user in all users, and then we will print it. We can do it anything. We can create these users within Active Directory. Even we can create these users in Office 365 as well, in Azure also, AWS also. So whatever logic you want to apply. For a time being, I am just printing these values. So let's write it. So we can use write output user, and here you can print user. So that's it. So we have a collection and we want to iterate it. So let's run it, select all and run the selection. So it has printed all the values. You can perform any actions whichever you want. If you want to create user in Active Directory, you can do that as well. So here you come to know that why we use for each. So for each is very handy when we have collections and we want to iterate those collections data. Then on that time we can use for each loop. Now proceeding further, so the next loop which we are going to discuss is the for each object loop. So this loop is very handy when we are using pipe operator. So let's look into this example so that you can better understand that. But prior to that, I wanted to tell you that whenever we want to get the information about the files, what are the files exist within the directory, so we use either dir or get child item commandlet. So both are equivalent. Basically dir is the alias for get child item. So in this example, I am going to use get child item and I will get all the information about the files which exist in this location. Then I will extract the full name of those files and print it over here. So this is my exercise for this. So let me write in words so that you can better understand it. Then I will write the program. So here the exercise is get all the files from this location. You can use whatever you have. You can choose any of the location. For this example, I have used this location where I have kept the demos. So here you can read the names of the file, or say you can get the detail of the file and print the full name of those files. So let's do it. So as I said we are going to use get child item and we will use the pipe operator. What it is doing, the pipe operator, I wanted to tell you, the output of this command or whatever the commandlet which we are using here, it will work as an input for the thing which is reside after this pipe. It can be anything. For this example, this half is the get child item, and output whatever the values we will get, it will be used as an input for each object, and then we will grab the full name from it. So let's do it. So now what we need to do, we need to print it, write output, and we will grab the name, write out file is, and we will use the plus operator, give a space. And here another thing which I wanted to tell, that the $_ is representing current information. You can consider it like a this operator. If you ever worked with any of the programming language like Python, C++, .NET, there is something called this operator. So it is equivalent like that. So consider it's a this operator of PowerShell which represent the current record, and from there we can grab the full name. Now run it. So this is our complete example. Let's run it and see what's the output we are getting. The full name. So now I want only the name. Instead of full name, we can use base name. So let's run it. So it will return only the name of the file instead of location. Currently it is returning the location as well in the full name. So if you run it, so you will get only the name of the file. So this is what I wanted to demonstrate it. So prior to going into other loop, I wanted to tell that when we can use for each object whenever we are using the pipe operator. So on that scenario, it is really very handy to use for each object loop. So let's proceed further and let's look into another type of loop. So the another type of loop is while loop. This loop is pretty much straightforward. So when to use this loop? You can use this loop for general use. It iterates only when a while a specified condition is true. Let me write an example for you. Suppose that if you want to print a number from 1 to 10, so how do we can do that? So we can use while loop, while, and here we can put a number is less than equal to 10, and here we can print it. So you can write over here, write output, and we can write num, and we can first we will initialize it also, number equal to 1, we will initialize it with 1, and here we can use num plus plus so that it get increased. So now what our requirement is to print the values from 1 to 10. So to do that, it is a general use. So we are using while loop, and till the time the condition is true, so this loop will execute. So let's run it. So now it has printed from 1 to 10. So it is really handy when we have a general use, and it looks very clean. So you can use this while loop as well instead of for loop. Now moving further, let's look into other loop. Now let's discuss about another loop, that is do while loop. Do while loop is almost same like while loop, iterate only while a specified condition is true. So when to use it? Use this loop when you want to execute the loop at once and then check the condition. So let's write an example so that you can better understand it. Suppose if we have a number equal to 0 and we want to execute it at least once, so we can use do, and here we can use while, something like that, and we want that less than equal to 10, and we can increase it number plus plus, and then we can write the output. So the same example we have taken over here, and we can print the output. So let's run it and see the output. We got error, sorry for that, there is a typo. So let's run it again. So it did the same thing. So the difference is the loop is executing at least once over here. That means this loop is executing first and then the condition is checking. So what will happen? Suppose if you will mark it as 10, so it will run at least once, but this is not the case with the while loop. If the condition it met, it will not execute, but this loop will execute once. So see this example, if we are initializing it with 10, but here it will print it at least once. So let's run it. So it has printed the value 11, and then later it has checked the value, but this is not the case with this while loop. Suppose if you will initialize it 10, so it will not print any value. Now try to execute it, it will not go inside the loop. So let's run it. So see here, it haven't printed any value because it is not meeting this condition. That's the reason it is not going inside the loop. But here the condition checking is happening after execution, after at least one execution. That's the reason it is executing even though it is less than. If we will use less than equal to, so it will execute 2 times. Now moving further, let's look into another type of loop. Now another type of loop we are having is do until loop. Do until loop is same like do while. So when to use do until loop? It is really good when you want to focus on terminating the condition. So let's look into the example now. So again we are going to use the same example, but instead of the while loop we are going to use until. So what we will do, we will grab it this example only, and instead of while we will use until. So here until. Now run it. Did you notice that the loop is executing in an infinite manner? I have stopped it with Control C. Why? Because it is not getting this condition. and this condition will never come. Why? Because we have been initializing this loop with 10. So what it is happening, that it is going there, incrementing it the value become 11, and it is checking that when the value comes to 10, and it will never happen because the loop is going on and incrementing those values, and that's the reason here ran till 6295. Then I have stopped with Control C. So here you can understand that whenever we want to terminate anything on that scenario, you can use until condition. So that means this loop will execute until these number of times. So that is very handy. I would suggest that, or I can recommend you to write all these scripts by your own, so that you can get better feel of it and you can understand the significance of each of the loops. Now let me correct this bug. So remove this. Now run it again. So it will stop at 10 because it will get the 10 in this range. So run it. Now this time it ran only once. Did you notice that? Why? Because it is the nature of until statement, where we are telling that you will run until you are getting the value which is lesser than 10, and it is getting the value 1 that is lesser than 10, and the moment it finds this value it stops. So to print the value from 1 to 10 using until, we need to change it to greater than. Then we are able to print the value from 1 to 10. So now run it. So now it has printed it. It has printed till 11 because it is the nature of this. The do part will execute first and then the condition will be checked. So at last when it is running, so that the reason it is incrementing the value from 10 to 11. So now moving further, let's look into the other loop. So the another kind of loop is the piping, that is implicit looping. So when to use this loop? Whenever you want to avoid coding an explicit loop, along with that you want to also avoid the potential bugs. So in that scenario you can use piping. So let's look into an example so that you can better understand it. So here what you need to do, we are going to grab all the processes which is executing now, and then we can print the name of and the ID of those processes. So there is a commandlet called select object, and here we can grab the property. Which property we are going to grab? The ID. Then we need to grab the process name and CPUs. So let's run it. See the output, what the output we are getting over here. So this is the output which we got over here. So these are the processes and their IDs. Whenever you want to avoid writing the explicit code for loop, then in that scenario you can use pipe operator. So pipe operator I already explained you when I was explaining the for object loop. On that time I explained you how the output of this commandlet can be used within this commandlet as an input. So this is the way you can use piping, that is also called implicit looping. So let's go back to the topic and wrap the session and understand that what we have learned so in this session. So in this session we have looked into what are loops, why do we need it, types of loop which we have discussed for each loop, for each object, while loop, do while, do until loop, piping, implicit looping. We also look into the example, so we know that how to code all these loops, and we have also discussed about each of the loops and we have understand that when to use it. So the last topic which is remaining over here is that interrupting a loop. So let's discuss that as well. So let me write a program, then I will explain that program. It is similar to whatever we have written earlier, but to save the time I can write it and then I will explain you. So let's jump into the scripting editor once again. So I have written it over here. So I have used the same example where we are printing from value from 1 to 10, but here I have used a condition where we are checking if the value is going to be 8, on that time it will exit from the loop. So this might come in your future work whenever you are doing something in certain scenario where you want to interrupt the loop. So how do we can do that? We can do it with the break statement. So just remember that. So for a dummy scenario I have used that. I wanted to execute it 10 times, but I want to stop the work prior to that. So here I am stopping the loop at 8 number. So let's run it. So it has printed till 8 and then it has stopped. So whenever if you wanted to interrupt the loop, you can use break statement. So let's go to the topic. So here now we have understand that interrupting a loop. So now here I am wrapping the session. I hope you enjoyed the session. See you in the next session. Till then, bye bye, take care.